The 48th session of the Senate in the third regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. May I ask everyone to rise for a minute of silent prayer. Thank you. With the permission of the chamber, we declare 1 minute suspension. Session is resumed. The Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Onasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar. Senate President Trilon.
13 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 47th Session, Monday, January 18, 2016, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none, the reading of the Journal of the previous session is hereby dispensed with and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 216 on the LTO Extension Office in Agoo, La Union.
Consideration of the measure on third reading is in order.
With the consent of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the Journal and Record the whole text.
Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 216, an act converting the Extension Office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, located in the municipality of Agoo, province of La Union, into a regular LTO district office and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure approved on second reading were distributed to the members on January 13, 2016, complying with the 3-day rule of the Constitution. I ask for a roll call vote for third reading.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan, Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Onasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar. Senate President Trilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill number 216 approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 273 on the Bayawan City Land Transportation Office.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
With the consent of the body, may we request the Secretary to read only the title without prejudice to inserting into the journal and record the whole text thereof.
Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 273, an act converting the extension office of the Land Transportation Office LTO located in Bayawan City into a regular LTO district office and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measures approved on second reading were distributed to the members last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule of the Constitution. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Companya Ruiz, Cayetano, Pias, Defensor, Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Rector, Villa, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 273 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 540 on LTO District Office in Imus, Cavite.
In order.
With the consent of the body, may I request the Secretary to read only the title without prejudice to inserting into the journal and record the whole text.
The Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 540, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office LTO in the city of Imus, province of Cavite, and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measures approved on second reading were distributed last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
The Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Quino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Companya Ruiz, Cayetano, Pias, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Rector, Villa, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 540 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 577 on the LTO establishment in Nabunturan, Compostela Valley.
In order.
With the consent of the body, may I request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill.
The Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 577, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office in the municipality of Nabunturan, Compostela Valley Province, and appropriating funds therefore.
Present copies of the measure were distributed to the members last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule. We are thus ready to approve on third reading. I ask for a roll call vote.
Secretary will do so.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Quino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Companya Ruiz, Cayetano, Pias, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Rector, Villa, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 577 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 696 on the LTO Extension Office in Orani, Bataan.
In order.
With the consent of the body, may I request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill.
The Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 696, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office in the municipality of Orani, province of Bataan, and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure as approved on second reading were given to the members January 7, 2016, complying with the 3-day rule of the Constitution. I ask for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Quino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Companya Ruiz, Cayetano, Pias, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 696 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 1246 on the LTO Satellite Office in Irosin, Sorsogon.
Any objection hearing none, consideration of House Bill 1246 is in order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 1246, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office LTO in the municipality of Irosin, Sorsogon, and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure were distributed to the members last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule. I ask for a roll call vote on third reading.
Roll call vote is in order.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Quino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Companya Ruiz, Cayetano, Pias, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Rector, Villa, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 1246 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 2028 on the LTO District Office in Antipolo, Rizal.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will read the title of the bill.
House Bill number 2028, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in the city of Antipolo, province of Rizal, and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure were distributed to the members last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter Compañero Ruiz, Cayetano P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Ligarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
13 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 2028 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 2095 on the LTO Extension Office in Santa Maria, Bulacan.
In order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 2095, an act converting the Extension Office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, located in the municipality of Santa Maria, province of Bulacan, into a regular LTO district office, appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measure were distributed to the members last January 7. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will do so.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter Compañero Ruiz, Cayetano P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Ligarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
14 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 2095 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 2188 on the LTO District Office in Baybay, Leyte.
Any objection here? None. Consideration of the measure is in order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 2188, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in the city of Baybay, province of Leyte, and appropriating funds therefore.
President, copies of the measure were distributed last January 11, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter Compañero Ruiz, Cayetano P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Ligarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 2188 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 2592 on the LTO District Office in District 2, Parañaque.
In order.
We may request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill.
The Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 2592, an act converting the satellite office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in District 2, Parañaque City, into a regular LTO district office and appropriating funds therefore.
Copies of the measure were distributed last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule. I ask for a roll call vote, Mr. President.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Cayetano P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Ligarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill number 2592 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 2606 on the LTO District Office in La Libertad, Negros Oriental.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
Request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 2606, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in the municipality of La Libertad, province of Negros Oriental, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
Mr. President, we've complied with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter Compañero Ruiz, Cayetano P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Ligarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilon.
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 2606 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 2716 on the LTO Extension Office in Cabadbaran, Agusan del Norte.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 2716, an act converting the Extension Office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, located in the city of Cabadbaran, Agusan del Norte, into a regular LTO district office and appropriating funds therefore.
President, there was compliance with the 3-day rule of the Constitution last January 7, 2016. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter Cumpanya Ruiz, Cayetano, PIS, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 2716 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 3217 on LTO District Office in Cabacan, Cotabato.
In order,
May I request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 3217, an act converting the Cabacan Land Transportation Office, LTO Extension Office in the Municipality of Cabacan, Province of Cotabato into a regular LTO District Office.
Mr. President, copies of the measure as approved on second reading were distributed to the members last January 7, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Cayetano, PIS, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilan.
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 3217 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 4404 on the LTO establishment in Carmona, Cavite.
House Bill, consideration of House Bill 4404 is in order.
I request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 4404, not establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, in the Municipality of Carmona, Province of Cavite, and appropriating funds, therefore.
Copies of the measure were distributed last January 7, complying with the Constitution. I move for a roll call vote, Mr. President.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Cumpanya Ruiz, Cayetano, PIS, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilan.
15 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 4404 is approved on third reading.
I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 4421 on the LTO establishment in Davao Occidental.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 4421, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office in the Municipality of Malita, Province of Davao Occidental, and appropriating funds, therefore.
Copies of the measure as approved on second reading were distributed to the members last January 7. I move for a roll call vote, Mr. President.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Cumpanya Ruiz, Cayetano, PIS, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilan.
16 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 4421 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 4784 on the LTO Extension Office in Tagaytay, Cavite.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 4784, not converting the Land Transportation Office, LTO Extension Office located in the city of Tagaytay, Province of Cavite, into a regular district office and appropriating funds, therefore.
Copies of the measure were distributed, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Cumpanya Ruiz, Cayetano, PIS, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Rilan.
16 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 4784 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 5085 on the LTO District Office in Tigaon, Camarines Sur.
In the consideration of the measure is in order.
Move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will do so.
House Bill number 5085, an act converting the Goa Camarines Sur Extension Office of the Land Transportation Office, LTO, into a regular LTO district office to be located in the municipality of Tigaon, Province of Camarines Sur.
Mr. President, copies of the measure were distributed to the members, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Cumpanya Ruiz, Cayetano, PIS, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Ligarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Paul, Rector, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
16 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 5085 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move that we consider on third reading House Bill 5825 on the LTO District Office in Sarangani.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
May we request the Secretary to read only the title of the bill?
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 5825, an act establishing a regular district office of the Land Transportation Office in the province of Sarangani and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, copies of the measures approved on second reading were distributed last January 13, complying with the 3-day rule. I move for a roll call vote.
Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
Honorable Senator Sangara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, Alan, Peter, Compañero S, Cayetano, P.S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Unasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Paul, Rector, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
16 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention. House Bill 5825 is hereby approved on third reading.
Mr. President, before we do the reference of business, may we acknowledge our guests in the gallery. We have students from Paref Woodrow Salabang. We have the officers of the OWA, or the Overseas Welfare Administration, led by Administrator Rebecca Calzado, Deputy Administrator Torres, and other officials. We have Governor and Mrs. Dennis Habawel of Ifugao Province. We also have with us Ms. Margareta Wallstrom, Mr. Jerry Velasquez, Councilor Al Arquiliano, former Senator Hejerson Alvarez, Secretary Emmanuel de Guzman of the Climate Change Commission, Mr. Mark Bidder of the UN, Attorney Tess De Vega of DFA, Director Val Roque of DFA, and Ms. Liza Silerio. I move that they be acknowledged, Mr. President.
The presence of our guests at this afternoon session is made of record, and we welcome them to the Senate.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 16 December 2015, it passed House Bill number 6168, an act amending the franchise granted to Buyers Communications, Inc. under RA 8107, expanding its scope into national coverage and renewing its term for another 25 years, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
Public Services.
Bills on first reading, Senate Bill number 3048, an act establishing a national policy of basic consumer fair treatment for
Public
airline
Services.
passengers. 3049, an act regulating the noise emission of motorcycles.
Public Services, Health and Demography.
3050, an act defining and penalizing criminal invasion of personal privacy.
Justice and Human Rights.
3051, an act supporting and regulating the use of emergency telephone
Public
calls
Order
and
and Dangerous Drugs and Local Governments.
3052, an act providing a tax credit to employers for the cost of implementing wellness
Health and
programs.
Demography, Ways and Means, Finance.
3053, an act providing programs for beach monitoring.
Committee on Environment and Natural Resources.
3054, an act providing for the reduction of adolescent pregnancy, HIV rates, and other sexually transmitted
Health and
diseases.
Demography, Youth and Finance.
3055, an act amending Executive Order 209, otherwise known as Family Code of the Philippines. Articles
Women,
21
Children,
to
Family
36.
Relations, and Gender Equality.
3056, an act establishing a blueprint for health in order to create a comprehensive system of care incorporating medical homes to improve the delivery and affordability
Committee
of
on Health
health
and
care.
Demography, Ways and Means, Finance.
3057, an act requiring congressional approval and the classification and disposition of real properties of the national government.
Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws.
3058, an act in regulating the handling and disposal of
Health and
polycredit
Demography.
biennials. 3059, an act requiring meat packers to disclose the additives that they place in their products.
Trade, Commerce, and Entrepreneurship, Agriculture and Food.
3060, an act providing for the establishment and maintenance of an undiagnosed
Committee on
refuse
Health and
registry.
Demography.
3061, an act prohibiting the posting of political signs on government property.
Electoral Reforms, People's Participation.
3062, an act preventing the inadvertent disclosure of information on the computer through the use of certain peer-to-peer files, sharing software without first providing notice and obtaining consent from the owner
Justice
of
and
the
Human Rights.
computer. 3063, an act banning certain trucks in particular
Local
hours of the day.
Governments.
3064, an act requiring the designation of the safest routes for the transportation of hazardous
Environment
nuclear
and
waste.
Natural Resources.
3065, an act protecting the users of radio frequency
Trade,
network
Commerce, and
devices.
Entrepreneurship.
3066, an act amending Republic Act number 9211 or to block
Health
labor
and
regulations.
Demography, Trade and Commerce, and entrepreneurship.
3067, an act exempting from taxation all donations, grants, or gifts, non-stock, non-profit education.
Ways and Means, Education and Culture.
3068, an act requiring the Department of Education to develop a safety internet education program and include this in the curriculum
Committee on
of all
Education,
secondary
Arts and
schools.
Culture, Finance.
3069, an act establishing provincial sports
Committees on
complex.
Games, Amusement and Sports, and Finance.
3070, an act regulating office-based and
Committee on
basic
Health and
procedures.
Demography, Finance.
3071, an act providing for People's Initiative to amend the
Constitutional
Constitution.
Amendments and Revision of Codes and Laws, Finance.
3072, an act requiring hospitals to enclose circuit television cameras in selected portions of the hospital and penalizing the publication of the tape
Health
of
and
these cameras
Demography,
without court
Justice
order.
and Human Rights.
3073, an act punishing the filthy rage of theft of any material manufactured, produced, owned, or belonging to information technology enterprises located in special economic zones product.
Economic
merchandise,
Affairs,
articles.
Justice and Human Rights.
3074, an act providing for recruiting, selecting, training, and supporting a national teacher corps
Education,
that serve
Arts and
communities.
Culture, Finance.
3075, prohibiting cellular and mobile phone providers from conveying unsold services that are automatically and
Public
voluntarily
Services,
charged against
Justice and Human Rights.
the Philippines. 3076, an act instituting shipping industry reforms providing for the purpose a clear system of ship registration and incentives, therefore, a comprehensive mechanism for ship mortgages, maritime claims, and maritime liens, and further defining the parameters for ship arrest and maritime
Public
liability.
Services and Ways and Means.
3077, an act requiring an annual report in injuries sustained by elementary and high school students participating in school sports.
Committees on Education, Arts and Culture.
3078, an act promoting organ donation
Education,
awareness.
Arts and Culture, Health and Demography.
3079, an act establishing comprehensive training program for
Education,
teachers of
Arts
children
and Culture,
handicapped.
and Finance.
3080, an act requiring school health service practitioners and schools within a city with a population of 1 million or
Committees
more.
on Health and Demography, Local Governments.
3081, an act providing for a special polling place for persons with disabilities
Electoral
and
Reforms and
elderly.
People's Participation.
3082, an act directing the Secretary of Energy to establish a pilot program to award grants and loan guarantees to hospitals to carry out projects for the purpose of reducing energy costs and increasing resilience to improve
Committee
security.
on Energy, Health and Demography.
3083, an act promoting and encouraging the valuable public service to disaster relief and emergency communications provided on a voluntary basis by amateur radio
Public
heads
services.
and national telecommunication commissions. 3084, an act establishing a grant and fee program to encourage and promote the recycling of used computers and to promote the development of national infrastructure for
Environment
used
and
computers.
Natural Resources.
3085, an act strengthening the barangay unit through support for barangay officials and barangay volunteer workers, amending Republic Act 7160 for other purposes.
Health, Demography, Local Government, Finance.
3087, an act amending certain provisions of Republic Act number 10368 entitled an act providing for preparation and recognition of victims and human rights violations during the Marcos regime, documentation of said violations, appropriating funds therefore for other purposes without Pimentel deterred.
Justice and Human Rights, Finance.
Committee reports 351 submitted by Committees on Economic Affairs and Local Government on House Bill number 5511 introduced by Representative Ramirez Sato et al. Entitled an act establishing the Southwestern Tagalog region to be known as the Mimaropa region, recommending its approval with amendments sponsored Senator Joseph Victor.
Calendar for ordinary business.
352 prepared and submitted jointly with the Committees on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement, Civil Service, Government Reorganization, Professional Regulation, and Finance on Senate Bill number 3086 with Senators Marcos Jr., Legarda, Ercito Estrada, Joseph Victor Ercito as authors thereof, entitled an act creating the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, defining its mandates, powers, and functions, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Bills 423, 1104, 2199, 2691 by Senator Joseph Victor.
Calendar for ordinary business.
353 prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on National Defense and Security and Government Corporations and Public Enterprises on Senate Bill 3088 with Senators Trillanes IV, Cynthia Villar, and others thereof, entitled an act amending pertinent laws on the retirement benefits and pensions of the uniformed personnel of the uniformed services and providing funds therefore, recommending its approval and substitution of Senate Bill number 3031, Sponsor, Senator Trillanes Deferred.
Calendar for ordinary business.
354, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Settlement on Senate Joint Resolution number 17, with Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito as author thereof, joint resolution ordaining a glossary of significant housing terminologies for the adherence by the key shelter agencies, other appropriate agencies of government, and other housing and urban development stakeholders, recommending its approval and substitution of Senate Joint Resolution number 16, sponsor Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Additional reference to business committee reports 355 submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 5583, Representative Madrona, an act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Masbate Community Broadcasting Co. Inc. under Republic Act number 7510, entitled an act granting the Masbate Community Broadcasting a franchise to construct, install, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations in the islands of Masbate and Romblon and the whole of the Visayas, and for other purposes, recommending its approval with amendments, the Senator Osmeño III.
Calendar for ordinary business.
356, by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill number 58844, introduced by Senate Representative Madrona, granting the Avocado Broadband Telecoms, Inc. a franchise to construct, install, establish, operate, and maintain telecommunication systems throughout the Philippines, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsored Senator Osmeño III.
Calendar for ordinary business.
357, submitted by the Committee on Public Services on House Bill 6038, introduced by Representatives Bayologo and Chidoro, an act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Corona International, Inc. under Republic Act number 7398, recommending its approval with amendments, Senator Osmeño III, sponsor.
Calendar for ordinary business. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 1700.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of proposed Senate Resolution 1700 is in order.
We request the Secretary to read the title and text of the measure.
Secretary will do so.
PS Resolution number 1700, introduced by Senator Loren Legarda. Resolution recognizing and commending Ms. Margarita Wallstrom, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, for her invaluable role in mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in international development frameworks and supporting the implementation of key disaster risk reduction and management programs in the Philippines. Whereas, as a nation highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change and extreme weather events, the Philippines has been at the forefront of a global call for effective advocates for the inclusion of disaster risk reduction and management in national policy, and for dedicated leaders in building capacities of national and local governments, communities, and citizens all over the world to manage existing disaster risk and build resilience against natural hazards. Whereas Ms. Margarita Wallstrom was appointed by United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as his Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction in November 2008. Whereas in her capacity as head of the UNISDR, she served as the focal point in the United Nations system for the coordination of disaster risk reduction efforts and providing institutional support for the implementation of the 10-year plan called the UGO Framework for Action 2005 to 2015, which aimed to build resilience of communities against natural hazards, and its successor, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, which sets priorities for action and clear actionable targets for reducing disaster risk and disaster losses. Whereas Ms. Wallstrom has remained consistent in advocating for disaster risk reduction and management policies to reduce losses for countries which are vulnerable to natural hazards and climate change impacts, particularly in the Philippines, where her engagement with parliamentarian champions supported the strong legislative framework embodied in the Climate Change Act of 2009, Republic Act 9729, and the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act of 2010, Republic Act 10121, which he has often cited as model legislation. Whereas during her period of leadership at the UNISDR, more than 170 Philippine provinces, cities, and municipalities became engaged in the Making Cities Resilient campaign, which paved the way for the municipality of San Francisco in Camotes Island, Cebu, to be recognized globally as a leader in disaster risk reduction through the 2011 UNISDR Sasakawa Award and making known worldwide the exceptional work by champion local government such as the promotion of zero casualty in Albay province and the swift and resilient shift to recovery of Cebu province after Typhoon Haiyan. Whereas her advocacy on topics such as safe schools and hospitals engaged the Department of Education and local governments in school safety assessment, disaster risk reduction, education, and preparedness in schools. Whereas her engagement with the private sector resulted in the launch in the Philippines of the risk-sensitive societies, ARISE, with now more than 20 companies as members sharing best practices on improving business continuity planning, public and private partnerships for pre-disaster planning and disaster risk education for the private sector. Whereas she has systematically engaged with communities at risk with particular focus given to a different group each year since 2008, starting with children and youth, women, persons with disabilities, the elderly, and indigenous people, resulting in a stronger voice for these groups from the Philippines in various global fora and policy-making processes. Now, therefore, be it resolved, as it is hereby resolved, to recognize and commend Ms. Margarita Wallstrom, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, for her invaluable role in mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in international development frameworks and supporting the implementation of key disaster risk reduction and management programs in the Philippines.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we approve proposed Senate Resolution number 1700, subject to style.
Any objection? Hearing none. Proposed Senate Resolution 1700 is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, may this representation be made a co-author of the resolution?
All the members of the Senate present this afternoon are made co-authors.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend the session with the indulgence of the body to allow the senators to congratulate the awardee.
Session is suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Bill 3088 under Committee Report 353 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
So transferred.
With the permission of the body, I move that we consider Senate Bill 3088 under Committee Report 353.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary is directed to do so.
Senate Bill number 3088, an act amending pertinent laws on the retirement benefits and pension of the uniformed personnel of the uniformed services and providing funds therefore.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Trillanes to sponsor the measure.
To sponsor Senate Bill number 3088 under Committee Report number 353, Senator Antonio F. Trillanes IV is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on National Defense and Security has the honor to sponsor Senate Bill number 3088, known as the Uniformed Personnel Retirement Benefits and Pension Reform Act of 2015 under Committee Report number 353. Mr. President, Section 7, Article 16 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution states that it is the duty of the state to provide immediate and adequate care, benefits, and other forms of assistance to our veterans and veterans of military campaigns, their surviving spouses, and orphans. It is therefore our responsibility to ensure that these retirees continue to receive benefits commensurate to the service that they have rendered, and that said benefits allow them to live comfortably during retirement. Existing retirement laws provide for the automatic adjustment of retirement pension based on the prevailing scale of base pay similarly ranked active personnel. However, said laws are non-contributory in nature, hence no seed fund was established at the time of their enactment. And the budget for the pension comes solely from the Annual General Appropriations Act. This form of budget sourcing eventually led to the ballooning of pension costs, which may no longer be sustained but by our meager government resources in the years to come. Mr. President, it is estimated that by year 2022, the total pension costs of the Armed Forces of the Philippines will eventually surpass the salaries paid to its active personnel. If this condition is allowed to persist, the government will eventually fail to provide adequate retirement pension to uniformed personnel. Thus, to allow the government to fulfill its duties to the retirees, we are pushing for the passage of this bill. And if passed, will implement reforms in the country's pension system. Specifically, this measure seeks to standardize the AFP monthly retirement pay equivalent to 2.5% for each year of active service rendered, but not exceeding 90% of the monthly base pay and long pay of the grade next higher than the permanent grade last held. Rationalize the adjustment of retirement benefits and pension of future retirees by terminating the practice of automatic adjustment of retirees' pension based on the prevailing scale of base pay of active uniformed personnel, and instead subjecting their pension to periodic review by the Department of Budget and Management, the Department of Finance, the JSIS, and the concerned agencies, to recommend to the President for his approval the appropriate adjustments thereto. However, third, establish a seed fund to be known as the Uniform Personnel Retirement Fund, to be managed by the GSIS, and to deactivate the AFP Retirement and Separation Benefit System, to formulate a mandatory contributory scheme. Mr. President, only the new entrants or the new recruits upon passage of this measure will be covered by this proposal, meaning the existing retirees and even those who are currently in active service will not be affected by this bill, and hence will be covered by the current retirement laws. Passing this measure is the least we can do to honor the sacrifices of our heroes and to recognize their unwavering fidelity and their life of service to our country, while we take into consideration the government resources capacity to support their needs. By providing a secure, reliable, sustainable, and economically viable retirement benefit and pension system, we fulfill the socio-economic mandate of our government to improve the lives of our veterans and retirees. In view of the foregoing, it is the hope of your committee that this august chamber will immediately and favorably act upon this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Trillanes. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend to give our members time to study the measure. Consideration of Senate Bill 3088 under Committee Report 353.
Consideration of Senate Bill 3088 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Bill 3086 under Committee Report 352 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
I move that we consider Senate Bill 3086 under Committee Report 352.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of Senate Bill 3086 under Committee Report 352 is in order.
I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 3086, an act creating the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, defining its mandates, powers, and functions, providing funds therefore and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator J.B. Ejercito to sponsor the measure.
Senator Ejercito is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as the Chairman of the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement, I stand this afternoon to sponsor Senate Bill number 3086 under Committee Report number 352, entitled An Act Creating the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, defining its mandates, powers, and functions, providing funds therefore and for other purposes. The Senate bill is in substitution of Senate Bill numbers 423, 1104, 2199, and 2691, authored by Senators Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Lauren Legarda, Jigoy Ejercito Estrada, and yours truly. Housing is a basic need of every individual, and the mandate of the Constitution is firm and clear as to the importance of housing and urban development. We are faced with a great challenge to provide decent and affordable shelter for the many that remain homeless in our country. In fact, the housing sector is facing a massive backlog, which is pegged at 5.6 million households by 2016, and it is expected to reach 12.4 million by 2030. With the population growing at an annual rate of 1.9% from 2000 to 2010, the continuing demand for affordable and adequate housing both in the urban and rural areas is projected to rise. However, it is daunting to know that despite the humongous task, the core legislation that creates a national policy-making body vested with the power to address and give high priority to the housing sector holistically is lacking. It is the opportune time that we take into consideration the creation of a single department that will focus solely on the management of housing and urban development, concentrating on access to and affordability of this very basic human need for shelter. So this proposed legislation, it is with great optimism that the escalating housing backlog and the institutional weakening of housing agencies will be effectively prioritized and resolved. The department shall be created through the consolidation of the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, or the HUDC, and the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board. The department shall act as the sole and main planning and policy-making, regulatory program coordination, and performance monitoring entity for all housing and urban development concerns. Under one housing department, we will then be able to better consolidate, rationalize, and coordinate the functions and powers of the HUDC and the HLURB, along with the other key shelter agencies, namely the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, the Home Guarantee Corporation, the Home Development Mutual Fund, the National Housing Authority, and the Social Housing Finance Corporation, which shall be attached to the department in order to facilitate faster response to the housing needs. The HLURB will be reconstituted and shall be known as the Human Settlements Adjudicatory Commission, and the adjudication function of the HLURB shall be assumed and exercised by the Commission. It is high time that we systematically address the housing need of this country and accept the challenge we now face to promote socially and environmentally sustainable human settlements and achieve adequate shelter for all. We need to realize the dreams of our people, the dream of every Filipino family. Just like food and nutrition and a safe environment, adequate shelter is a basic right of every Filipino, worthy of having its own department. The government must take it seriously, take matters in our own hands, and commit to this obligation. With the creation of the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, we will be more effective as a government in addressing the people's rights to adequate and safe housing. Having said this, Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I fervently push for the passage of Senate Bill number 3086, creating the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Ejercito. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, in order to give our members time to study the measure, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 3086 under Committee Report 352.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
I move that we consider Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Joint Resolution number 17, Joint Resolution ordaining a glossary of significant housing terminologies for the adherence by the key shelter agencies, other appropriate agencies of government, and other housing and urban development stakeholders.
Mr. President, I move that we once again recognize Senator Ejercito to sponsor the measure.
Senator Ejercito is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I stand this afternoon as the chairman of the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing, and Resettlement to sponsor Senate Joint Resolution number 17 under Committee Report number 354, entitled Joint Resolution ordaining a glossary of significant housing terminologies for the adherence by the key shelter agencies, other appropriate agencies of government, and other housing and urban development stakeholders. The said Senate Joint Resolution is in substitution of Senate Joint Resolution number 16. The Senate Joint Resolution endeavors to address the problem of lack of common terminologies in the housing and urban development sector because of the conflicting and inconsistent definitions. The various terminologies create confusion to government agencies, private sector, and other housing stakeholders. Moreover, this also accounts for the diverse and erroneous interpretation of housing data, as well as appreciation of housing problem, which results to incongruous housing planning and intervention by both the government and private sector. In this regard, the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing, and Resettlement of the Senate and the Committee on Housing and Urban Development of the House of Representatives distinguishes the need to formally ordain and publish a glossary of significant housing terminologies, standardize and systematize the respective definitions of the significant housing terms for the adherence by the key shelter agencies and other housing and urban development stakeholders. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I ask for your support for the swift passage of Senate Joint Resolution number 17. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Ejercito. The chair is just curious. Is there a similar resolution in the House that was already acted upon by the lower house? This bill is a definition of terms.
Yes, Mr. President, I believe that this has been passed by the House.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Ejercito.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354.
Before we suspend consideration of the measure, The chair notes that this is a very thick law. May I, and this is basically a definition of terms. May I request the sponsor to ask the staff to have a comparative tables of the definition of these various terms in the other laws and how it differs with those existing law, and what is the effect of such differences. Does it mean it has been amended? So that for easy reference, because this is a very thick measure, 95 pages, we have very limited time to assist the chamber in the careful consideration of this measure. May I reiterate the request of the chair that the staff prepares a matrix of the definitions, just comparable definitions in the other laws, and if there are differences.
Yes, Mr. President, we will submit forward to the offices of the different centers.
Thank you very much, Senator Harris.
You reiterate our motion, Mr.
To
President.
suspend any objection, hearing none, consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2947 under Committee Report 248. This bill pertains to the proposed Balanced Housing Development Program amendments, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, in order.
The parliamentary status, Mr. President, is that the sponsor delivered his sponsorship speech last September 15, 2015. I move that we open the period of interpellations.
This is Senate Bill
2947, the Balanced Housing
2947,
Development
yeah.
Program, Mr. President.
All right. Period of interpellation is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator J.B. Ejercito.
Senator Ejercito is recognized.
Mr. President, no members have signified their intent to interpellate. Given that that is the case, I move that we close the period of interpellations.
Any objection? Hearing none, the period for interpellation on Senate Bill 2947 under Committee Report 248 is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
Move that we recognize Senator Ejercito for committee amendments.
The gentleman from San Juan, Senator Ejercito, principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized on the period of committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 2, line 13, under section 2, amendatory provisions, page, after the word requirement, we insert the sentence, for this purpose, the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council and the National Economic and Coordinating Authority shall jointly determine and set separate socialized housing price ceilings for the socialized subdivision and socialized condominium projects, which shall be reviewed or revised at any time, but not more than once every 2 years, to conform to prevailing economic conditions.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Likewise, Mr. President, on page 2, line 23,
Please proceed.
we delete the phrase provided that and insert the phrase, however, if it was shown that the commissioned developer grossly failed to perform its obligations, to read as follows. However, if it was shown that the commissioned developer grossly failed to perform its obligations, the owner and or developer of the main subdivision or condominium project shall be solidarily liable with the owner and or developer of the socialized housing project for the development of the latter, regardless of the provisions of their joint venture agreement.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Likewise, on under section 2, amendatory provisions, page 3, lines 10 to 15 shall be rephrased to read as follows. Furthermore, as part of the requirements in the approval of the subdivision and condominium plans to be issued by any local government unit or government agency, the complying developer shall submit in writing the manner in which compliance with this section is proposed, subject to practical and reasonable changes or amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The last amendment, Mr. President, under Section 2, Amendatory Provisions, page 3, line 25, insert the following as subsection C. Section 20 of Republic Act Number 7279 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 20, incentives for private sector participating in socialized housing. To encourage greater private sector participation in socialized housing and further reduce the cost of housing units for the benefit of the underprivileged and homeless, the following incentives shall be extended to private sectors. Letter A, reduction and simplification of qualification and accreditation requirements for participating private developers. Letter B, creation of one-stop offices in the different regions of the country for the processing, approval, issuance of clearances, permits, and licenses, provided that clearances, permits, and licenses shall be issued within 90 days from the date of submission of all requirements by the participating private developers. Letter C, simplification of financing procedures. And letter D, exemption from the payment of the following. Number 1, project-related income taxes, capital gains tax on raw lands used for the project. Number 3, value-added tax for the project contractor concerned. Number 4, transfer tax for both raw completed projects. Number 5, donors tax for land certified by the local government units to have been donated to the socialized housing purposes. Provided that for purposes of application for tax exemption, only the portion allotted for socialized housing by private developers shall be entitled to the tax incentives under this Act. Provided further that upon application for exemption, a lien on the title of the land shall be annotated by the Register of Deeds. Provided finally that the socialized housing development plan has already been approved by the appropriate government agencies concerned. Provided finally that all the savings acquired by virtue of this provision shall accrue in favor of the beneficiary subject to the implementing guidelines to be issued by the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council.
Just a little minor amendment. Instead of the phrase savings acquired, can we replace it with savings realized?
Yes,
and
Mr.
then the last
President.
proviso, provided finally that all the savings realized by virtue of this provision shall accrue in favor of the beneficiaries, etc. Change the word acquired to realized.
Yes, Mr. President, accepted.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Thereafter, Mr. President, thereafter renumber the previous subsection C as subsection D. That's all, Mr. President.
Majority Leader,
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of committee amendments.
period for closure of the period of committee amendments is in order.
Mr. President, there are no individual amendments. I thus move that we also close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none. The period for individual amendments under Senate Bill 2987 under Committee Report 248 is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading Senate Bill 2947 under Committee Report 248.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill 2947 under Committee Report number 248 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2955 under Committee Report 255. This bill pertains to the proposed Overseas Workers Welfare Administration Act, Mr. President.
I'm sorry. Is that in the agenda?
Yes, Mr. President. It's
All right. I'm not saying it. Huh? Last page.
it is on page 7 at the top of the page, Mr. President,
On
of the
the top of
agenda. Yeah. Senate Bill 2955.
Any objection? Here none. In order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measures that the sponsor delivered the sponsorship speech last September 22, 2015. I move that we open the period of interpellations.
period for interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize yours truly as the sponsor of the measure.
The acting majority leader is recognized as a sponsor of the measure.
Mr. President, there are no interpellations, but we have a few amendments. So, in view of that, may we move to close the period of interpellations?
The period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we likewise close the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is terminated.
I move that we open the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, if this representation may be allowed to propose a few individual amendments.
Please proceed.
Mr. President, on page 3, line 20, page 3, line 20,
Page 3.
line 20,
Yes.
on section 7B, before the words "the employer," to delete the words "an OFW or."
Any objection? Hear and approved.
On the same page, on line 20, after the word "employer," to insert the phrase "or by an OFW in case of voluntary membership."
Any objection? Hear and approved.
Sir President, on pages 5 and 6 under section 19, to delete subsections A and B from lines 37 to 49 of page 5 and lines 1 to 11 of page 6. So move.
Any objection? Hear and approved.
On page 5, line 35, after the title of the section "Deposit and Remittance of Collection," to insert the following: "The OWA shall ensure that deposit and remittance of collections shall be in accordance with the Commission on Audit, COA, Department of Budget and Management, DBM, and other existing rules and regulations." So move.
Any objection? Hear and approved.
Next amendment, Mr. President, is on page 8, line 40. Page 8, line 40, section 24C. After the word "disbursement," to insert "of at least 100 million pesos." So move.
Approved.
Next amendment, Mr. President, is on page 6, line 33.
Page.
Page 6.
We go back. The last amendment was on page 8.
Yes, my apologies, Mr. President. This is an anterior amendment.
Yes, please proceed.
Section 20G, to delete the words "3" and insert "2," open close parenthesis, number 2. So move.
Objection? Hear and approved.
Next amendment, page 10, line 45. After the word "OWA period," to insert the following: "There shall be one deputy administrator for administration and fund management, and one deputy administrator for operations." So move.
Approved.
On page 12, Mr. President, line 30, page 12, line 30, after the word "attached," to delete the word "agency" and to insert the word "office." So move.
Approved.
On the same page, Mr. President, page 12, line 34, after the word "program," comma, delete the phrase "at least 10% of OWA's collections of contributions for the immediately preceding year shall be allocated annually for the reintegration program," and insert the following: "OWA shall ensure adequate annual funding for this core program." So move.
Approved.
Next is section 35C, Mr. President, on
Page.
page 12 and 13, to delete the two paragraphs after the title of subparagraph C. On page 12, line 42, to delete the words "all member OFWs" up to the words "duly certified" in line 50. So move.
Excuse me. Any objection? Approved.
On page 13, Mr. President, line 1, to delete the words "to in writing" up to the words "per annum" in line 10. So move.
Approved.
On page 13, line 11, after the word "provide," to delete the word "other."
Approved.
Section 38, Mr. President, on page 14, line 49, before the word "serve," to delete the word "exclusively." So move.
Approved.
On section 47, Mr. President, on page 17, line 1, after the word "maintenance," to delete the sign colon, provided that appropriations for personal services and regular maintenance and other operating expenses, MOOE, coming exclusively from the OWA fund shall not exceed 20% of the total member contributions realized in the immediately preceding year. So move.
Approved.
on section 56, page 18, line 15, to delete the words at least 5 and to insert the words at least 10. So move. On page 18, section 59, this is line 43, to insert a new paragraph as follows. Current officials and employees of the OWA shall continue to draw their salaries, benefits, and emoluments from OWA funds until such time that the corresponding funds from the national government shall have been appropriated and released to OWA pursuant to section 47 hereof. So move.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no more individual amendments. I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Before we close, the chair would like to make an inquiry.
Yes, Mr. President.
The OWA, the overseas Filipino worker would contribute to the OWA every time they are on a contract and would leave for abroad. Is that a correct recollection?
That is correct, Mr. President.
So that, and how much is paid?
$25, Mr. President,
So
for
that
each contract.
okay, so that a land-based worker, assuming that he has a what, 2-year
It's
contract,
usually a 2-year contract.
a 3-year contract,
Two-year.
a 2-year
You're correct.
contract, would pay $25 once in 2 years, or is it once every year?
It's just once for the 2 years, Mr. President.
Once in
Yes.
the 2 years. What about in the case of the seafarer?
It's still $25, no matter the duration of the contract, even if it's 6 months or 1 year. It's still $25, Mr. President.
Not every time they would come for, okay, if the contract is for, are there contracts for 3 months or 6 months that the seafarers would have or would sign? Because my impression, and the sponsor can correct us, the seafarers would go home for vacation every 6 months. Is there a new contract signed after that?
Hello.
Yes.
According to the resource persons present who are from OWA, there are contracts which are of that duration, Mr. President, and they have to pay that $25 every time there's a new contract.
That is
Yes.
what we are pointing at. If it is for 6 months, every time they would come home and the contract and a new contract is signed, they again would pay for another $25.
Yes, Mr. President.
In the case of land-based workers, they would only pay $25 for 2 years. In the case of a sea-based seafarer, it is possible that he will pay $100 for those 2 years because he would pay $25 every 6 months.
I see your point, Mr. President. Medyo lugi yung ating sea-based workers. But according to Administrator Calzado, the payment is good for 1 year. So let's say a sea-based worker has 2 contracts in 1 year. They only have to pay once in that 1 year,
Well,
the $25. So that corrects my earlier statement regarding where I said that each contract is a new $25. Because in this case, if the 2 contracts are in a chronological or calendar period of 1 year, you have 2 3-month contracts, for instance, and the worker returns, he no longer has to pay that $25 for the second contract. Tama ba? He does not have to pay. It's good for 1 year, yung bayad niya ng $25 for his first contract, Mr. President.
yes. But if the contract is only good for 1 year, he pays $25 once.
Yes.
If it's for 2 years, he pays double that of the land-based worker. Because the land-based
Yes,
worker...
because the $25 is good for the duration of the contract, Mr. President.
would it be possible for the committee to come up... Will the committee agree that there is some inequity here and therefore we should equalize the land-based and the sea-based worker?
There are certain instances, we agree, Mr. President, where there may be some unfairness, unequal treatment, which is, we acknowledge that initially, when the OWA was first conceived, there was just one treatment for all types of OFWs. But over the years, with the Migrant Workers Act and its amendments under 10022, there's been an increasing differentiation between the 2 types of workers. But definitely, we're welcome to, if you want, during the BICAM, we'll look into, we can work out a proposal to make it more equitable for the sea-based workers who have shorter contracts as a rule.
Yeah. Yes. The concept is there must be equal treatment both for the seafarers and the land-based workers in terms of they're being required to pay this subscription or membership fee in the OWA every time they leave the country for employment abroad.
Certainly, Mr. President, that's a most welcome concern to equalize the two types of workers.
All right, so I assume, so the commitment of the sponsor is that in the Bicameral Conference Committee, he will carry this mandate and propose an amendment in the course of the Bicameral Conference Committee deliberation so that this concept of equalization can be inserted.
Certainly, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I move that if there are no other amendments, move that we close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, the period for individual amendment is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2955 under Committee Report number 255. So moved.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill number 2955 under Committee Report number 255 is hereby approved on second reading.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2955.
Period for consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer House Bill 5511 under Committee Report 351 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. This is the bill on the Mimaropa region, Mr. President.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
With the permission of the body, I move that we consider House Bill 5511 under Committee Report 351.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
House Bill number 5511, an act establishing the Southwestern Tagalog region to be known as the Mimaropa region.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator J.B. Hershey to sponsor the measure.
Senator Hershey is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, this afternoon it is my privilege to sponsor House Bill number 5511 under Committee Report number 351, an act establishing the Southwestern Tagalog region to be known as the Mimaropa region. Mimaropa is composed of the provinces of Occidental Mindoro, Oriental Mindoro, Marinduque, Romblon, and Palawan, and the cities of Calapan and Puerto Princesa. The region is one of the country's top producers of rice, banana, coconut, mango, cashew, papaya, and cassava, which are among the country's top export products. Fish production in the region is ranked second in the country. In addition, its tourism plays a major role in the growth of the national economy, as it contributed 7.8% to the GDP in 2014. It is a duly recognized region since 2002 by virtue of Executive Order Number 103, Series of 2002. However, although the region has been recognized, there were no enabling mechanisms that were placed to implement the real intention of Executive Order Number 103. According to the Commission on Higher Education, the regional line agencies cannot fully implement the intent of Executive Order Number 103 due to the following constraints. First, lack of permanent plantilla positions for the line agencies due to the Department of Budget and Management's policy of scrap and build scheme. And second, lack of seed capital for the capital outlay and monthly operating expenses of the region. House Bill number 5511 will serve to eliminate the hindrances that prevents Mimaropa from becoming a fully recognized region. Moreover, as intended by Executive Order number 103, House Bill number 5511 seeks to promote efficiency in the government by administrative decentralization, accelerate social growth and economic development, and improve public services within the region. House Bill number 5511, when enacted into law, will grant statutory authority to Mimaropa to establish framework for comprehensive development plans and programs for the socio-economic, cultural, and physical needs of the region. From the words of Congresswoman Josephine Ramirez Sato of Occidental Mindoro, the approval of this bill will pave the way for the region to determine its growth, thrust, and greater attention can now be provided to the island provinces. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, let us help the people of Mimaropa region. I urge you to support the passage of House Bill number 5511, otherwise known as the Mimaropa. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
President, I move that we suspend consideration to give of the measure to give time to our members to study the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of House Bill 5511 under Committee Report 351 is hereby suspended.
Just a 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension.
Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
May we take up some administrative matters, Mr. President?
Please proceed.
With the consent of the concerned committee chairs, I move to transfer the referral of Senate Bill 2744 entitled An Act Converting the Tarlac College of Agriculture, or TCA, in the municipality of Camiling, province of Tarlac, into a state university to be known as the Tarlac Agricultural University, and appropriating funds therefore, from the Committee on Rules to the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Committee on Ways and Means, and Committee on Finance. So move.
Approved.
Mr. President, if we may elect some senators to the bicameral conference on the disagreeing provisions of the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act, Senate Bill 2968 and House Bill 5525, elect the following: Senators Angara, Alan Cayetano, Legarda, Aquino, Lapid, and Ejercito. So move.
Any objection hereunto?
Mr. President, there is no other business to take up. I move that we adjourn session till tomorrow, January 20. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Session is adjourned until January 20, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.